And have you seen amongst the constituents of the 12th congressional district much of a consciousness or an interest in these kind of getting money out of politics issues?
Absolutely. It might be the 11th district now after the redistricting. California lost a seat.
Oh, okay.
But
okay.
That notwithstanding, it was the 12th before. But yeah, we did a rally actually at Pelosi's office over the holidays. And, I remember distinctly hearing from military veterans, students, entire families. This is absolutely a concern. Realize, anybody who has money in a 401k plan is implicated here because they're basically getting taken advantage of by members of Congress gaming the markets that they claim are free markets that they are bending to their advantage. And everybody is getting fleeced in a particularly direct way. And this is a city where, it's either in San Francisco, we have a very dramatic economic stratification. And so it tends to be either, people with money to invest who are implicated in this way, or people who are just barely getting by, if at all, and the idea of a bunch of wealthy people scamming the market and sitting on reforms that would guard human rights against the vagaries of our predatory system. I think it's offensive across that spectrum. So it's not just ideologically diverse in terms of who cares, but it's also socioeconomically diverse in terms of who cares. You can be wealthy, you can be middle class, and you can be working class, or you can be destitute, and it doesn't matter. You can still be outraged about the corruption of wealthy intergenerational dynastic oligarchs gaming the markets and subverting Congress to fill their pockets at the public's expense.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is what you alluded to earlier of the socioeconomic stratification within San Francisco. It's got some of the highest earning households in the country, with most of those households, I looked this up earlier, about 105,000 of those households earning $200,000 or more per year. And given your political and economic positions that don't...
You say it was 100,000 households earning $2 million or more a year?
$200,000 or more per year.
Got it. Sorry, okay.
Yeah, and I just found that it's called Data USA is the website that looks at specific congressional districts demographically.
Okay. Right on. Thanks for pointing me that.
Yeah, and so you don't really represent the kind of neoliberal, upper elite, more like capitalistic wing of the Democratic Party, which is generally the wing that is more favored by that kind of upper high earning class. And so it would seem to me that you're up against a lot in your district, just demographically speaking. So how do you kind of respond to those elite interests in your district?
I educate them. The crucial point here is that there are parochial interests that people have, for instance, to lower their taxes if they're in a high tax bracket. But then there are interests that are widely shared, like the interest in human rights or climate justice. And those interests, a growing awareness of our shared interests, is the basis for the political revolution that we are living through today. It's why socialism is ascendant. It's why there is this crisis of legitimacy within each of the corporate political parties. It's why the corporate consensus is fraying at the seams. And in its wake, we have this, bizarre fracturing of all of the what seemed to be before coherent political ideologies into 1,000 different camps. And this reflects people coming to realize that the neoliberal vision of individuated interests, the interest, for instance, in lowering one's tax rate or choosing policies that benefits one's family at the cost of the community, it's the bankruptcy of that approach that has led us to this point, this precipice of climate catastrophe. And I think that even people who are wealthy in San Francisco tend to be empiricists. They are not normally the, don't look up, ignore science, bury your head in the sand types. They tend to be alarmed by the climate crisis, if nothing else. And so even if there's an oligarch, and maybe they aspire to be one themselves, is in the office at the moment, even if they might share some affinity with Pelosi or some, thing about her that they might appreciate, I think in San Francisco, if they come to understand her role, and this is a key, I'll come back to this in a second, but if they come to understand the incumbent's record on everything from engineering the climate crisis and ensuring that it would accelerate, to funding every war for profit in the last generation, to helping eviscerate federal spending on affordable housing, to paramilitary policing, to kids being in cages at the border. If the district has a chance to understand the history and the record, even the wealthy people here are alarmed, and the need for change is so desperate and so widely understood that I'm quite confident San Francisco will make a better choice if the word gets out. I mean, in the last cycle, we won 81,000 votes in the face of sustained disinformation about everything, about, from me and my record and my past and my character to the incumbent's record and performance in office. I mean, if San Francisco understood how much Pelosi helped Trump when they were both in Washington, I don't think there's any way she wins an election again. But you combine that with racist smears against the challenger, and like, oh yeah, go figure, she was able to hold us to 80,000 votes. I'm ultimately eager simply to get a modicum of legitimate democratic process here. And if that happens, I have a great deal of confidence that my neighbors will make more informed, ultimately better choices than they have in the past.
Mm-hmm. And when you say that Pelosi helped Trump, what are some of the ways that she did that?
The most conspicuous would be July 2019. She funds the tune of $4.6 billion, a series of concentration camps at our nation's borders, sacrificing any requirement for human rights that she affirmatively abandoned in the negotiations with the White House. She expanded Trump's corporate trade authority on the very same day that she announced the first impeachment process.
There is no question, of course, that this trade agreement is much better than NAFTA. But in terms of our work here, it is infinitely better than what was initially proposed by the administration.
The first impeachment process that she delayed for years, in spite of mounting public calls to hold the criminal president accountable. And each of the two times that she did finally show up after long dragging her feet, she affirmatively hamstrung both processes. And I said this at the time, by taking the most meaningful, powerful, transpartisanly resident, I'm kind of making up a word there, charges. And that was the emolument clause, the same emolument clause. I think I alluded to it in our conversation a little while ago, the prohibition on self-enrichment at the public's expense. That was the ground that would have taken Trump down, because even, in fact, frankly, especially right-wing audiences, if the impeachment hearings were a litany of all the ways in which that guy is taking your money and putting it in his filthy pocket, GOP senators would start hearing calls from their base. They care more about, frankly, that kind of corruption than Democrats do, apparently. Than, Democrats embrace Pelosi, and she's a poster child of it. And then contrast that with the right-wing knee-jerk reactions to like welfare queens. The ultimate welfare queen was Donald Trump, and Pelosi insulated him affirmatively twice after delaying each of those processes. I could go on here. She expanded his surveillance authority. She gave his supported every military budget expansion request that he proposed, the tax breaks for the wealthy under his administration. I mean, there's, she enabled even the points in time when she got credit for resisting him. You might remember there was a moment when she tore a speech of the president's and tried to claim that that was resistance. That was the State of the Union address that she invited him to give in Congress after having impeached him. So you impeach a president, it doesn't stick in the Senate, you bend over backwards to invite him into the House. He gives a campaign rally in the middle of the House at her invitation. And then she has the gall to tear the speech up and act like that was any meaningful resistance. Like she literally rolled out the red carpet for him and then tried to say for the cameras, oh yeah, just kidding. Mm-hmm. While he's brainwashing the public. It was, sorry. Yeah, and frankly, just a point attendant to this, it's not only the case that Pelosi helped Trump when he was in office, but it is also the case that the journalistic establishment fell completely asleep at the switch, and the construction of an artificial caricature of a liberal lion around a neoliberal, self-serving, intergenerational oligarch is a reflection of profound institutional failure across the entire press establishment. And like the deference to congressional insider trading, this is not new or episodic. This is sustained and entrenched, long-standing, and I dare say as much a threat to the republic as the machinations of a criminal would-be aspiring tyrant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember during the impeachments that Ralph Nader had sent a letter to Nancy Pelosi laying out a bunch of things that they could bring in an impeachment case that were more along the lines of the emoluments clause and mm-hmm. personal enrichment.
If Nancy Pelosi wants to remove Donald Trump, she went on a very narrow base. She is clearly not supportive of impeachment generally. She took it off the table when it was proposed to her in 2007, the impeachment of the war criminals, George Bush and Dick Cheney. And she's come forward with a very narrow hand for the most impeachable president of all time.
And making the argument, as what you just said, of that these things are much more important to the American people than anything about Ukraine. And mm-hmm. again, that they just ignored those kind of arguments, probably because that kind of self-enrichment is a bipartisan issue.
You nailed it. Pelosi showed up for impeachment like a boxer throwing a fight. And the whole time she was there, what she prioritized before executive accountability was protecting the corruption in which she and her party are actively complicit.